Breaking tonight, CNN reporting an FBI official is under investigation for allegedly altering a document in the 2016 Russia probe. The DOJ, as you may know, has been looking into allegations that the FBI wrongly surveilled Trump campaign staffer Carter Page as part of its probe into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. And the latest development in the investigation being led by DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz. According to Senator Lindsey Graham, the Horowitz report should be wrapping up soon, and we should expect its release on December 9th. And boy, oh boy, from the sound of it, it's juicier than a Georgia peach. Speaking of peach, as the impeachment hearings continue today, two more witnesses told the House Intel Committee that some Trump administration officials were up to some shady business over in Ukraine. Quid pro quo, right, Clarice? Who knows? But will it be enough to sink this president? Joining me tonight, former California Republican congressman and former House Oversight Committee chair and current candidate for California's 50th district. It is Darrell Issa. Welcome back, sir.
Well, thanks, Kennedy. And look, thanks for bringing up the fact that there is an awful lot of dirt that hasn't even been turned over in an effective way from before 2016. One would think it's only President Trump executing on his foreign policy responsibilities that should be talked about.
And what do you think the significance is of this revelation that an FBI employee admitted under questioning in the probe, where over 100 witnesses were questioned under oath, that they, in fact, did alter a document? What could that mean?
Well, what it could mean, and what it does mean, is that Michael Horowitz is doing his job. He's genuinely looking into whether there was wrongdoing.
Is that the FISA warrant application, do you think?
Well, it appears to be the FISA warrant application. It appears to be either the premise of or some execution of that spying on the president. The point, though, is that Michael Horowitz, as the IG, doesn't have criminal capability. He refers that. He obviously has seen at least one criminal referral, and, in fact, there's likely to be more. Yeah,
he referred Andy McCabe for criminal prosecution. But let's talk a little bit about impeachment and how this plays into the whole thing, because obviously the president's team is going to look at this revelation and say, see, I told you so. They were out to get me from the beginning. And a lot of Republicans have been saying that Ukraine was very active in trying to undermine the Trump candidacy in 2016. Fiona Hill, Dr. Fiona Hill, today on Capitol Hill testified that that is just a conspiracy theory. What did you make of some of her testimony today?
Well, you've got to know Fiona Hill. Now, this is a Russia expert who, in 2015, believed that we should basically throw Ukraine under the bus because lethal weapons, if they were delivered to Ukraine, could upset the Russians, put us into a war. Her advice was, don't defend Ukraine. So this is somebody who has an interesting Russian bent. Russia's bad, but Russia's so bad you can't defend Ukraine. The fact is, we need to get to the truth. One thing I learned in my years on oversight is you follow the facts where they lead. The fact is the Russians meddled with our election. The fact is that after tens of millions of dollars, Mueller found that the president and his people were not involved in Russia meddling. Whether Ukraine did more or not, Ukraine is the third most corrupt country by our own State Department.
And that's what Fiona Hill was saying today. She was saying her case in 2015 was, don't give them guns because you can't trust them with these guns because they are so corrupt. So for Republicans who are saying this president has a right to ask for a corruption investigation because they're so corrupt, doesn't that sort of bolster that argument?
Well, I think you're making a good point, but let me make a similar point. Is the president, President Trump and Vice President Pence and the others, are they above the law? If not, then we're investigating. And you're seeing that every day with Adam Schiff coming up with his investigation. Mm-hmm. But if, in fact, as it appears to clearly happened because the vice president bragged about it, the vice president interfered in Ukraine to get his son off the hook. If his son got $1 million on a board for not knowing anything but for being his son, then, in fact, should that be investigated, or is quite frankly, the Bidens above the law, but the president isn't? people who care out there should be saying, I don't like this investigation of the president. I don't like that it's being done as impeachment, but I appreciate that no one's above the law. But you've got to believe that the president did one thing right when he sent a message that no one's above the law and that this very corrupt country, if they were going to get money that Congress appropriated for them, they were going to have to show at least an interest in cleaning up their act.
Well, it's also interesting that Democrats are saying that Burisma and the Bidens are intractable, that they are so connected that you can't investigate one without the other. And to me, that in and of itself is problematic. You should be able to investigate a company like that. I do think there was a level of inappropriateness here, though. And I think that if you're looking at who had the worst week, I'd probably say Rudy Giuliani. What do you say?
Well, look, Rudy's a very competent guy who tried to do the right thing outside the United States. It's always very difficult. I would say it wasn't a great week for Rudy. It was a good week, though, for the fact that they're running on empty and they're grasping at straws. And at the end of the week, what they had was a mixed bag at best. And most of the time, it was people who weren't on the call, didn't hear anything, giving you an opinion. And the idea that a Russian expert says Ukraine is too corrupt to defend from Russia, that pales in the whole question. You have a history and a background in Eastern Europe. I've looked at it for decades. Either we stand against the Russians and we deal with those people, whether they're perfect or not, that will stand with us, or we throw away all those years of the Cold War, all the work we did to try to liberate Europe and make it free. So I don't think there's any question that you're either against Russia and willing to work with partners, even if they're flawed, or you're letting Putin put back together the Soviet Union and have people live in tyranny.
That's exactly what he wants to do. And it is tyranny. And for those who fled communism for freedom and came to the United States from Eastern Europe, like your family and my family, those are the people you should be talking to, because, you know, they're the ones who remind us that we cannot forget our very recent history here. And I don't trust Russia. I trust you. Thank you very much, Darrell Issa.
Thank you, Kennedy.
Very good.